Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. So in this video I'm going to show you how I made a stool slash side table out of pallet wood. So the first thing to do was to make some marks for the legs, and for the legs I'm going to use the skids of the pallet. That's the thicker parts that the slats are attached to. So here I'm just setting up the table saw, and I'm going to attempt to get 2 legs per skid. So I'm cutting them pretty much straight down the middle, and I chose the better skids that were a denser wood for the legs. And there I'm just skimming off the rough edge. And that left me with 4 almost perfectly square legs. So now the next thing was to make the bands. I'm going to have a top band and a bottom band to hold the legs together, and for that I'm using some pallet slats, and I want to make the top band slightly thicker, deeper than the bottom band. So I just trimmed off the edges, and then cut one of the bands just slightly thinner. So now it's time to cut the bands to size. And I just made some marks using a speed square and made the cuts on the miter saw. So I wanted this stool to be also a side table, as I don't tend to sit on a stool very often, but the option's there if you need it, such as if you have visitors round and needed an extra seat. But I actually wanted this to put a lamp on or a plant. So now I'm marking up the legs to cut the length of the legs. So now I've got my basic pieces. I've got my 4 legs and the 2 bands that I need. So before I go any further, all the nail holes I filled in with some wood filler. And I then made some marks ready to screw and assemble these bands. And I'm also making some marks where the pilot holes are going to go, which will connect the legs to the bands. And I wanted everything to line up nice and symmetrical and neat, because later on I'll be adding some dowels in here. So now I just transferred those markings over to the other bands. And to assemble it I'm going to use screws, but I'm going to hide the screws with dowels. So the main reason I wanted to use screws is because I wanted the screws to squeeze everything together nicely and prevent the stool from creaking later in life when the glue starts to dry. So now I'm just drilling all these pilot holes on the drill press. And now I want to make a countersink hole for the dowels, so I'm just going to add a piece of tape here as a depth gauge. So now it's time to get these bands glued and screwed together. And once the screws have been screwed in with the drill, I just went round with the screwdriver just to hand tighten everything. So now it's time to add the dowels to cover up those screws. And the dowels that I used, I think I got these out of an old bed. So there's a few different colours, there's some darker ones and some lighter ones. So when those two bands were done, I just let the glue dry, and then when it was dry, I removed the excess dowels with a tenon saw. So now I wanted to attach the legs to the bands. So I worked out how high I wanted the bottom band to be from the floor and made some markings. So where the both bands attach to the legs, I made these markings. Number one, to know where the bands go, but also so that when I router the legs, I wanted to leave these sections empty of router so that the corners would connect with the bands nicely. You'll see what I mean later on. So I chose a round over bit, just a basic round over bit for this. And started to remove the material here. And I left those sections where the bands are going to go empty. But along one of the corners, I routed the whole way because that will be the back corner that doesn't connect to a band. And you'll see what I mean later on. I also routed over the ends of the feet. And you can see there those sections have just been left. I then went ahead and routed the bands as well. So now I needed to work on the top, and I had a piece of old white spruce wood that I got out of a skip. So I realised that 2 pieces of this would be perfect for the width of the seat. So now I needed to go around the top of the seat and mark up where I'm going to drill all the pilot holes for the screws and the countersink holes for the dowels as well. And I spaced these holes equally. And again, I used a piece of tape here as a depth gauge, and I went a bit deeper this time because the wood on the top is quite thick, so I could put those dowels quite deep into the wood. So now it's time to get the top on, so I glued around the top of the band and just used a paintbrush to get the glue around. I also glued in between the two pieces of spruce, and I thought that the dark coloured wooden dowels would go nicely with this white spruce wood to give a nice contrast. So I made sure everything was nice and square, and I drilled through into the bands and then screwed everything down. And then it was time to add the dowels. And you can probably see at this point, this project took me quite a while to do. I didn't think that making this stool would take me so long, but it did take quite a while, although it was good fun. So now I'm adding the dowels. And again, I'm going over the top and just filling in any imperfections, as all this wood is really rough wood that I've found, scrap material, and that's probably one of the reasons why it took so long to make. If I'd have bought the wood from a shop, it'd be quite a bit easier, but that's part of the challenge, trying to do it with scrap wood. So again, I took the tenon saw and removed the dowels. And then I rounded over the top and the edges. So now it's time to attach the legs, and those areas where the bands are going to go, I coated up with glue, and again used a brush to make sure I got glue everywhere, and I went all into the corners of the top. And I then clamped them up to keep them in position. And attached 4 screws to each leg. Again, just hand tightening, taking my time, making sure everything's nice and straight. And then for the second band, I added glue all around the area where the band's going to go. And then I just added that top band, and it was a nice snug fit. And I then used the combination square to make sure that they were all equally spaced from the ground, the corners there. And again, just drove screws through, 4 for each leg. So then it was just time to add the last dowels to these holes. And remove them. Now it was time to give it all a good sanding down, and I started off with an 80 grit, and I really just took my time here. It was a really rough, all the surfaces were really rough, so I just had to take my time going over it by hand. And then I went up to a 120 grit and finished off with a 240 grit. So now it was just ready to give to add a finish, and for that I used some medium oak wax, and I added a little bit of thinner just to help it go on easier because it's quite a large area to cover, and just whacked it on with a brush. I was also running out of wax as well, so I had to thin it down. So the last thing to do now was to buff all the excess wax off. And that was it all finished. So I was quite pleased with how it turned out in the end. I like the way that the dowels contrast with the spruce on the top and also the pine, and it's extremely solid and strong, so it's great. It doubles up as a stool and a side table. So if you found this video useful, please leave me a like and also comment. And as always, thank you for watching. And please remember to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.